What made American Psycho stand out amongst other novels was the story it told and exactly how it was written. Released in 1991 and authored by Bret Easton Ellis, it follows the life and times of Patrick Bateman, who was a Wall Street yuppie by day, sadistic serial killer by night. Later on in the year 2000, a film adaptation of the book was released, directed by Mary Harron and starring Christian Bale as Bateman. And yes, it is hilarious to think of this as Bruce Wayne's Wall Street years before becoming the Dark Knight. Having read both the novel and seen the movie, the state of my sanity notwithstanding, I'm here to give an analysis on the two. Which piece did what better? Is the movie faithful enough? Which one will destroy your childlike innocence the most? This is Book vs. Film, American Psycho. First, let's take a look at our main character, Patrick Bateman. See what I'm talking about? It's one letter off. Starting off with the novel, it's written in first-person perspective, so you're able to see exactly what Bateman is thinking and how he sees the world around him. And let me tell you, within the first 20 minutes, you'll be able to notice something is very wrong with him. He's a snobby, homophobic, racist, and mind-numbingly boring businessman with an unhealthy obsession of trying to fit in with his equally obnoxious peers. You know, a real crowd pleaser. He's constantly judging every single person he comes into contact with, going so far as to know every detail about the clothes they're wearing, the pattern, who designed them, you get the idea. And he describes their appearance every single time he's in a group. It doesn't matter what's going on or if you've met the character before, the first words you read after they're introduced are what their clothes are.
Wear that outfit again.
What? I didn't hear you.
I said, do not wear that outfit again.
The same thing occurs whenever he's discussing his possessions. The book actually has over 3 pages dedicated to him describing his apartment layout. Seriously. Due to his obsessive personality, he's prone to anxiety attacks and is angered whenever he thinks he's being made a fool of or if he's not in control of a situation. He very rarely lashes out at his friends though, instead choosing to take out all his frustration on his unsuspecting victims. Speaking of the supporting cast, there's Evelyn, Patrick's fiancée, Tim, Craig, David, and Lewis, Patrick's usual running buddies, Courtney, Patrick's side girl and Lewis's fiancée, and Jean, Patrick's secretary, who's got romantic feelings for him and the only decent one out of the bunch. Barring her, everyone else is rich, snobby, and generally do nothing except give Patrick reason to escape his boring life. The biggest issues they deal with on a regular basis are their physical appearance and dinner reservations. You know, the kind of folks that'll make you turn to alcoholism rather than be around them, or in Patrick's case, cold-blooded murder. There's also Donald Kimball, a detective investigating one of Patrick's murders that appears later, but we'll get to him. So as Patrick goes about struggling to fit in with his cheery friends by day and doing what he feels is best by night, you start to see that it's having a major impact on his sanity, which not only affects his surroundings, but how the story is told as well. There's actually a point in the novel where it completely switches from first to third person and in the middle of one of Patrick's mental breakdowns. Something I've personally never seen before, but let me say, it spells out complete insanity. So how does the movie cover all this? Well, honestly, aside from the combining of certain scenes or events taking place at different times in the book, I think it's a very faithful adaptation. How faithful, you may ask? Well, to put it into perspective, 90% of the dialogue is from the book. Honestly, I've never seen anything like that before. Director Mary Harron really stuck to the source material while making this film. And thank God, because it would have been so easy to make this film into something it's not. Hey Shyamalan, I'm looking at you. Why don't you get to stepping? No place for you here, you know. Christian Bale's performance really adds to the movie as well. I honestly can't think of a better person who could have played the role. He perfectly captures the persona I pictured while reading the book, and actually managed to add a pretty funny side to Bateman's personality. Don't believe me? Just try and watch the hip-to-be-square scene without chuckling. It's a challenge for sure, however dark the scene may be. I actually don't have much to say on the supporting cast, because a lot of them don't differ very much from their novel counterparts. Not that that's a bad thing. In fact, I think it would end up taking away from the film if they were any different. The biggest difference would probably be Detective Kimball, who I mentioned earlier. Instead of being a young detective around Patrick's age in the novel, he's played by William Dafoe, a much older man than Christian Bale. I find this to be such an odd choice because it gives off a completely different feeling from the book. In the novel, due to their similar age and because Patrick sees a bit of himself in Kimball, the feeling comes off as representing Patrick's own conscience, his hidden guilt, if you will. In the film, it comes off more as a fear of getting caught by an older superior than anything else. Both work well, but I tend to lean towards the book as far as preference goes. As you can see, despite being very good pieces all on their own, when comparing the book and film, each has its own strengths over the other. Bateman, for instance, I think is a bit stronger in the book. Don't get me wrong, I love Bale's performance, but the book simply has more time to make you feel what he's feeling, and he is at times surprisingly sympathetic. It's amazing. He's a maniacal psychopath, and yet you'll find yourself relating to him more than you'll care to admit. The last few chapters are nothing short of absolute insanity, and while it is portrayed well in the film, it's just hard to capture all of that the same way without the assistance of words, and you'll get two different feelings from each adaptation. However, there are times when the movie is able to use its shorter time limit to its advantage. Obviously, it's faster paced, but the way it combines different characters with different scenes all the while having the same dialogue is truly fantastic. Take a scene from the book, for instance, when Patrick calls a random call girl up to his apartment, and as she's leaving, he talks about how he thinks he's losing his mind. In the movie, the call girl is replaced with Jean, which makes for a much more intense and compelling scene and builds the relationship between the two at the same time. Oh yeah, and there's also a scene with a nail gun that's referenced here too, but I really don't want to mention that particular part of the book, which brings me to my next point, the ultra-violence. This is one thing I'm glad wasn't portrayed with pinpoint accuracy on the big screen, because the level of violence in the novel is otherworldly. I don't consider myself a squeamish person, and I often found myself dashing to the points where the violence ended on the page because the descriptions were that nauseating. The movie has a much more toned-down level of on-screen violence, but it doesn't shy away from having its own fair share of grisly scenes. Especially the one that has Christian Bale run naked down a hallway covered in blood wielding a chainsaw. I'll bet that's the only time you'll see him do that in a movie. And although Mr. Ellis's depictions of violence are truly something else, I find the film doesn't overdo the blood and gore too much, and has a perfect amount that will keep the audience interested. So I've analyzed the film and the book, and you all must be thinking, why this? For those of you that have read or watched either piece, there's so many scenes that don't seem to make sense, and Bateman just isn't sympathetic at all. Well, before you fly off the handle, consider this. This entire story deals with insanity and obsessive behavior. Thus, it's suggested that Bateman is an unreliable narrator, or the way he's describing things might not actually be happening in reality. It's entirely up to interpretation, but I have a bit of info that might shed some light on this situation.
By the way, just so you know, there's spoilers ahead. If you don't want to be spoiled, go read a book or watch a movie yourself, you know what I'm saying?
There are two Batemans, and we see both of them on screen or on the page at different intervals in the story. Let me explain. When Bateman is around his friends, he's shown as not being important and barely in control of his everyday life. People often mistake him for someone else, and should he ever sneak in a confession about a violent act, they either don't hear him or they misinterpret his words altogether. Overall, not a very important sounding fellow. But when Bateman is committing his heinous acts, sexual or violent as they may be, he's shown as always being in control, being cool and collective, and never once faltering. Very different from the Bateman just mentioned. More proof of this would be a scene where Patrick gets frustrated at Lewis and follows him into a restaurant bathroom to kill him. However, when he does, he finds himself unable to act upon his violent urges. Why? Nothing beforehand ever led us to believe that he had some sort of remorse or moral compass concerning Lewis, so why couldn't he kill him? Furthermore, Lewis takes his actions as a sexual advance, which causes Patrick to immediately panic and dash out of the room. That doesn't make much sense, unless the violent acts so far have been fantasies inside Patrick's mind, and when he tries to act on these urges in real life, it is too much for him to handle. With that bit of info in mind, the whole story is a lot easier to digest. Which parts are hallucinations and which are real, though, are entirely up to interpretation. With all of that said, which would I recommend more? Well, surprisingly, I found myself leaning more so towards the film. It's just more for a general audience. It's got a faster pace, toned down violence, and you can still grasp the story much of the same way as you would by reading the book. Plus, Bale gives a great performance, and in my opinion, it's one of his best. even if part of it consists of that. Don't get me wrong though, I think the book is a masterpiece, but that doesn't mean I can't see where people wouldn't like it. The violence, as mentioned before, is very extreme and would turn some away, and the way that Bateman describes his surroundings can be exhausting sometimes. So if you're curious as to what the story has to offer, I'd say go check out the movie. And if you're feeling daring, definitely check out the book. And that concludes my review, everybody. I hope you lot enjoyed it. It's something a bit different than I wanted to try, so give me some feedback, and maybe, just maybe, I'll do more. But I'm afraid that's all we have time for. As always, be sure to give me a like and subscribe. Every bit of support helps, and I greatly appreciate any and all who choose to show it. Also, be sure to check out my and my friend's alternative channel, Bubba Inc. We sit around, play video games, and have a good time. Hopefully you all enjoy that. But until next time, I'll see you guys later.